Yeah, so thanks obviously very much for joining me today. Obviously on our live kind of podcast recording. Obviously a really key topic amongst businesses and hiring managers alike is to how to remain unbiased during interview process, hiring process, etc. It's something that's becoming more prevalent every day. I've been in recruitment 10 years as one of the co-founders over here at Amicus. And I think that, this is such a hot topic and something that a lot of us are so passionate about. So we've got a number of people joining us today. So first and foremost, as I say, I'm Shaun. I'll just let the panel introduce themselves. I'm Shaun. I'm one of the directors over here at Amicus. We've been established for sort of 6 years, and we've got sort of 35 staff now across the UK, Germany, and the US. But obviously D&I and unconscious bias is something I'm super passionate about as well. So as a panelist, Gavin, do you want to start? Obviously, introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Leah and Victor as well.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Gav. I've been a web developer since the 90s, a full-time people manager since 2015, and last year I started consulting. I'm kind of trying to bootstrap into some kind of fractional director of engineering / content creator about leadership. And what I find that means is that I'm reckoning with all the weaknesses of being a independent small business owner. So I can learn sales and marketing and all that fun stuff that has nothing to do with what I really want to do. My mission is to transform tech by supporting people from underrepresented groups into leadership. And I'm especially passionate about disability, neurodivergence, and diversity.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the intro. Leah, will you just give us a quick intro into yourself, if that's okay?
Yes, I'm Leah. I am a software engineer and co-founder of my latest startup attempt. I've worked in a lot of different companies over the years, and in between many of them tried to build my own products, start my own business, and I'm determined this time it's going to work. But yeah, I've worked everywhere from junior developer up to CTO, and built a fair number of products from scratch. Been involved in a lot of different hiring, like team leadership, which is probably where my passion truly lies, which means it's slightly difficult route to get there. Got to build up a company before I can get a team out. But I think for me, hiring teams, leading people is certainly a really big passion of mine. And I think, to build anything effectively, you need diversity and diversity of thinking.
Perfect. Yeah, and fingers crossed for the startup. I've got everything crossed that it works out as well. I'm sure it will. Victor, do you just want to give us a quick overview of yourself as well?
Yes, of course. I'm Victor, but everyone calls me V. My pronouns are him. I'm currently the head of engineering at Her, one of the biggest LGBTQ dating apps for women. My career has been also a bit long now. I started as well as a top developer, put myself through uni, did a lot of jobs in IT from level 1 support up to right now being head of engineering. CTO, it's a bit of an overlap there. Backend developer, many years. I love it, but I love as well working with people, helping as well, push forward diversity and equity, inclusion for everyone. I think the industry have a long stride to go, and I'm doing my best for it. I'm super passionate. I love to be in leadership positions because it enables me to help and also give me enough challenges in my day-to-day to keep myself busy.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much. And so, great intros. Obviously, super experienced in the technology field, which is great. And as I say, I think all four of us share a great passion for avoiding unconscious bias when hiring, which is obviously the topic of today. So, just asking you all then. So, what do you believe the strategy is for businesses to kind of adopt a more kind of progressive and inclusive hiring process? To obviously remain unconscious. What do you believe that to be? If anyone wants to start.
I'll go first. Go ahead, Leah.
We're finally two people at the same time. I think like obviously the first thing is like you need to want to, and you need from the top down, you need it to be a big priority. So a lot of people sort of kind of say they want diversity, but you've got to really make it a big priority and make it kind of almost like the number one priority in your hiring process. And you almost have to kind of throw everything out the window that you've currently got and like start from scratch from a diversity first perspective. Like really commit to really commit to that approach. I think that's the first step, really.
Yeah,
I think I think you were going to jump in there, weren't you, Gav? I've obviously got a couple of points on that, but were you going to say something similar, or?
I think so. Like for me, I'm developing an acronym here. I think transparency, efficiency, and adaptability. Really making the whole process visible, how it works, like especially for candidates, but also for people involved in the process, like a lot of clarity about how decisions get made. Efficiency, because the 6-stage interviews, like hours and hours and hours of work, is draining for all kinds of people. And then adaptability, being able to change the process to work with the individual, to accept neurodivergence, to accept like different abilities, different free time, that kind of stuff, but still come out with a good process.
Yeah. Have you got anything on that, Victor?
Yes, I think like on those points Gavin and Leah shared, they are really important. You have to want to do a diverse and fair process for everyone, right? But also you have to make enough accommodations. I'm leaning always towards to try to humanize the interviewing process as much as possible. Like I found that gives like a really good start to it, and starting with obviously fighting the unconscious bias, that we are going to talk about it, and it's like the hardest part. But I think that having a standardized process that you can follow, and as every process, right, you don't need to be like sticking to it every time. You always have to consider that there is not a one size fits all. You have to be willing to as well look at your own processes, because process itself are biased by design. You make a process for interviewing, and then someone that have a different requirement, say like neurodivergency, differently able, etc. And you have to be willing to put the effort as well on your side to say like, I'm gonna just throw away this thing. For example, a lot of companies, they don't send you beforehand the task or the questions, right? And you need to be like, oh, I'm gonna break my process because this person it will perform better in the interview, and that performance will level the field by sharing the questions beforehand, or like making sure that all the processes is asked before, like, okay, do you have anything that we need to be aware, so make sure that call is gonna work well for you. And I think that's the part of the humanization, right? Seeing the process as like a tool and the people as the component, and the diversity at the core of like, I'm gonna do this for everyone, and for everyone can succeed at this process.
Yeah. Just touching on that point, great point. Are you almost saying then that you should, before the interview process and application process begins, almost make a bespoke kind of process for that individual, or are you kind of saying like there should be, you should give somebody maybe options of how to approach a hiring process, an individual, rather than, like you said, have a process, because that already is bias in itself? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, I think like having a process that you can stick to it is really good, because process give you the pace and give you the structure and establish fairness, right? But it's very, very unlikely you are going to foresee the circumstances of like maybe 100 candidates you are going to interview for a process. So you should be looking at the process, but put the human first, right? Humans over process. And when you start the pipeline, in your disclosure of like, hey, great, we got your CV, thank you for applying. The interview is going to be like this format. We are going to do this, but if you have any requests, please contact us. And then if someone has any request, given whatever it is, you have a process to, try to accommodate. And then you have a process you can follow, like probably like the all the time or almost all the time. And if you need to accommodate, you are flexible enough to say like, okay, the process is not going to work for this person. We have to look at an alternative, because it's a lot. Imagine that you have to interview someone with speech impediments, and it's an in-person interview, and the process does not have flexibility with it. What are you going to do, right? Or these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think outside of just the sort of actual kind of disabilities element of things as well, like people think differently and people operate differently. So like there are interview strategies that companies will just sort of by default apply. And I know, as a woman in tech, like I approach problem solving differently to most men. And a lot of these interview processes, I mean, I know I've gone to interviews where it's basically like, have you consumed Google? Like, no, I have not. And I freeze on the spot if you ask me like quick fire questions. It's not that I don't know the information, it's that I can't relay it to you in an interview situation. Whereas if you sit down and have me solve problems with you, I'll probably perform a lot better. And so I think, having different options for people to allow them to like A, feel comfortable, and B, shine in their own ways rather than feeling like they're being put on the spot and like expected to fail almost.
Yeah, I think I obviously, as you can probably expect, I've worked with many different businesses, and I think the lack of adaptability in interview processes is something that I always try and harp on to clients about. Like most clients just have this is our process. If you don't want to do that process, see you later kind of approach, but they'll kind of, like you're saying, we're really inclusive and we're, really, have an unbiased approach, and that doesn't actually formulate what they're actually saying. So I completely agree. Even like a tech test, there's loads of different ways to do a technical test, but one company just has one way. Well, why not? Can we not give candidates a different option? Have you kind of seen that work well in practices? Have you kind of seen it work well? I don't know if you're doing it currently, or what have you seen work well, I suppose, in that?
For the technical test, you mean, or for
just in general? What have you seen maybe work well?
Yeah, just in general, I have very good results to being like straightforward about what is the process, and if the process will be a good one for the person interviewing. It takes an email, really. It's such a little effort. It's such a meaningful thing, right? And it just start to signal the signal that you are not doing DI as a PR stunt, and you are really into it, and you start not even when they join the company. You are starting when you reach the first time. So giving those options and people being able to say like, I will love to do this and that. I have several experience. I'm not gonna comment because it involves real people that they have like their process adjusted, but I have very good results. I have people through all these processes, and their feedback has been always like, this is one of the most human, most effective recruitment process, because I've been asked, and I've been listened or seen, and act accordingly. So they give them like that, because it's basically you are leveling the field. I mean, if they, and especially obviously about the diversity of thinking that I was talking, but if it's something besides that, like because that is for every individual, right? But if something outside that, these people are in a disadvantage with a very strict process. So when you level the field, you find that diversity, you find that brilliant people that in a normal corporate or very rigid process, they will not be able to succeed. And at the end of the day, you don't interview people to make them fail, right? You interview people with the hopes of succeed.
Yeah.
I want to throw down something that I've had like pushback for on pre-sharing your interview questions, like sending it to candidates before the interview instead of surprising them with them in the interview. Like, what do you all think of that?
I have no problem.
Yeah, neither. I think that's a good idea. I think just allowing anybody to prepare ahead of time can only be a good thing. And again, I think some of it is just like understand what you're trying to get from that. I think like the more you can make people feel comfortable, the more you're going to get the best out of them. Like I think even calling something a tech test makes some people very nervous. Like a lot of people did not test well in school. So as soon as you're calling it a tech test, like some people are going to really like freeze up. And I think, so much around removing the bias and opening up to inclusivity is, is your language, and like, even down to your job spec, like, what is your job spec saying? Who is it turning away before you've even got them in the door? And the more transparent you can be on both what you're looking for, and also, as V said, like, if you can, if you are in a position where you have lots of options for like that for the hiring process, say that as early as the job spec. Make sure every recruiter you're working with is telling that to candidates, and say, like, this is not prescriptive. So if something doesn't work for you, please be open. Like, we're not setting you up to fail. Like, we want to get to know you.
Yeah. I think I was laughing at a couple of points because, firstly, I think most interview processes are designed to try and make people fail. It's completely, for me, the wrong way to ever go about recruitment, right? You're recruiting because you want to hire, whereas most people kind of design interview process for people to fail first and foremost, which, it is kind of the wrong mentality for me. And secondly, the other point where you're telling people that asking them questions, even as a recruiter, if I'm working on behalf of a client and a candidate, the amount of times where I ask it, and maybe we've asked the client, can you share some tips on, what is the interview going to entail? And it's so like blasé. It almost seems like they don't want to give anything away to the candidate to prepare. Again, they're almost setting them up to fail, which, it shouldn't feel like you said, a test or something that's going to make someone feel so onerous that they're going to freeze in an interview. So that great points. Moving on kind of to the next kind of point, I suppose, whose responsibility would you say it is to ensure a workplace and the interview kind of hiring process is inclusive? Whose responsibility would you say it is? Or who? Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Is the easy answer. But go ahead, Leah.
I think like 100% I agree. Yeah, everyone. But I think for me, like, it starts at the top. So like the top, it has to start at the top and filter down. So like the person or people at the top have to be really committed to it, and then they need to embody that themselves, and then effectively, expect and require those same standards from everyone else. Like, lead by example and expect that from everyone, especially the people that are in charge of hiring. But so like for me, it's it's so important that like top leadership is really like invested in that, and then once you filter that down, if they are really invested in it, then it's more effective.
I agree. I was about to say exactly the same. It's everyone, right? And especially at the top. And that does not start only with like having like the right process and embodying diversity as the individual level, but also start with the diversity at the top level, at the C-suite level, at the founder level, right? This is something for founders, for people that they might listen to us. Like, if you are trying to drive a diverse company, but I look at the directive suit and I only see white dudes like myself there, that's for me is like, I mean, I know I'm white, I know I'm cis by men, I present this way, right? But when I saw that, it's like, why is no women? Why is no people of color? What is the message I sent, right? And then from that, you have to drown then the policies, because that's a lot of companies out there. Like, we have all this publicity, but you look at the leadership and it's majority non-diverse, and that is not only diverse in gender, right? Diverse in race, in gender identity, whatever. It's also probably diversity of thought. That is like, if you are in a group, if I sit in a room with like 5 guys from Spain on the IT sector from the north of Spain, we think very, very similarly. So that starts to kill the diversity used at the top. So if that happens like down, nothing is going down. I mean, all the efforts are like the other way around.
Yeah. No, I think it is obviously everyone's responsibility, but I think it has to start at the top, because if you've got in the top means that, like you said, the C-suite, because ultimately if like you've got middle manager or senior managers, but having a really unconscious view or unbiased view when hiring, but that doesn't reflect with the founders. It's broken to begin with, hasn't it? It's kind of got to work at the top down. I suppose, is there any examples that you've seen where it works really well? I don't know, I've seen companies already, but is there any examples where you've seen it work really well, where there is that from the whole wider organisation, or badly, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's tooting my own horn, but if you look at the leadership of her, right? I mean, it's just like it sounds like self-promoting, but I'm not, and I'm always very proud because we have a very diverse leadership team. It's small, we are a startup, but Robin, the founder, have the right idea for this. We are a diverse group of people making a product that is queer at its inception for queer people, right? I haven't seen, to be honest, I've seen companies doing great things. This is the most close to me. I can't talk because I'm part of it, but there is also companies. It usually falls that when the company is like either certain age, like the company has like a long history, or like it's start to be a scaling company in certain industries, the leadership usually tends to be like more male, cis male, Caucasians oriented.
Yeah. How about you, Gavin? Have you had any experience like that, or similar?
I've had experience where it's successful. I've had experiences where it's not successful. I've even been responsible for like things not being great. One thing I wanted to point out about like working like this is it's uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. If you surround yourself with people who think differently from you and are going to disagree with you, and who you want to empower to like point out when they think you're wrong or when they think you could do better, that's not always going to feel so good. That's not always going to be fun. And I think that's one of the barriers to diversity is the very real discomfort. You hire someone going, yes, we're going to be diverse. And then they come with all these opinions and they keep telling you you're wrong. And it's really annoying. And we should probably fire that person because they're not a real team player. And I think the challenge for embracing diversity and working and understanding unconscious bias is realizing it's unconscious. You're going to need others to reflect on you and tell you how you can improve, how the process can improve. And it will mean growing and changing and living with that discomfort every day. And I really want to big that up and point that out. Yes, we want more diverse teams and organizations, but it's not going to be sunshine and roses to get there, and even to stay there. It's going to be hard, painful work.
Yeah. Have you got any kind of points on that, Leah, I suppose?
I think that's actually a really good point that I hadn't necessarily consciously thought of before, that actually the more diverse your team is, the more uncomfortable it is. And that's so true. And I think, a lot of people do shy away from discomfort. And I mean, that's why I was really keen to sort of really highlight the unconscious bias in this title, because it's so normal. It's so normal to like be attracted to people that look like you. And that doesn't necessarily mean they physically look like you. It's just they share a lot of the same kind of characteristics. And, when you're interviewing, it's so easy to just, naturally gravitate towards people that are like you. So actually that's a really interesting point on the discomfort levels. And actually that's probably a good thing. I've worked in a range of companies. I would say very few have been like genuinely diverse. I think some have had more, sort of less white cis men, but have typically been, so I worked in a company that was very female empowerment oriented. So it was, all white women, which was great and a different experience, but also not diverse. There's that. And then I worked in another company where there was a male CEO and the majority of the rest of the company were female, but because the male CEO didn't have any females on his level, there was a lot that was dictated down. And then, he ended up losing a lot of female leadership and bringing a lot of male leadership in. And that was actually just a real shame to see. And I think if he'd appointed any of the women up to like sort of equal level to him, I think a lot of things would have started to run smoother on that front. So yeah, I think I've seen a lot more of the negatives, but not always. I mean, I've obviously worked in a lot of male-only tech teams because that just comes with this country. But I've experienced a couple of situations where it's been not necessarily in tech, but in the wider business, shifted to sort of more women sometimes, and that doesn't equal diversity either.
Yeah. I think on that, a lot of people think diversity is just gender.
Yeah.
You know, I see that so often. We're looking for a diverse talent pool. Okay, what does that mean to you as a client? And 99% of the time, they're just looking for gender diversity, and I think that's half the problem. That doesn't actually make things diverse.
No, absolutely. And like I've actually been told by companies that I've gotten a job because they needed women on the team. And it's almost like it just checks the diversity box and they're like, cool, done now. And it's just not the way it works.
And they undo everything by telling you that you were a token hire.
I'm like,
great job. Yeah, it's like whoever was, great job. You know.
Like, cool. So am I qualified or not?
Yeah.
I think it's some thought what Leah was saying, right? That always fascinates me because we always talk about diversity and how good it is and how it trickles down. And we never flag out, like, the thing is, like, if your leadership team is non-diverse, that also trickles down. That also permeates the culture and creates not a sailing glass, you know, it's not a sailing glass. It's literally a brick wall there that, you know, stops the diverse people to come in, stops people who want to change, but also creates a clear culture of, like, we are here to say whatever is needed to get where we want to be by any means necessary. And if the means necessary is hiring, like, women because we have a quota for representation or telling that we are diverse when we are not, and that's awful. And I think a lot of companies get away because people, obviously, unconscious bias is really tricky to address, but also the culture is, when you're involved in it, it's really hard to take a step back and realize that all those things that they are not clearly overly bad on day to day, but they are like expressing microaggressions, lack of opportunity, lack of diversity, is there, and it's a real problem. When people say, like, oh, the gender gap is closing the industries, it's like, what? In which world, in which country, in which universe are you living on? Look around. If you look around a company, and not only a technical company, you will see that women, like, they are not a majority, and when you scale it to, like, the mid to higher managerial positions, they are absolutely a minority.
Yeah, 100%. I think like the other point that I sort of think you touched around there that is really important is like it's much easier to be diverse when you're already diverse. Like, if you're interviewing, if a candidate walks in and they see diversity, whether it's in like the leadership team or the general company, like whatever it is, it's easier to attract more diverse people. But, like, you know, it's a much harder task if you kind of look around and you're like, wow, we are not a diverse company at all. How do we change this? That's a real uphill battle, and is much more challenging.
Yeah, I think you had a point there, Gavin, didn't you?
Yes, I noticed the question that popped up, and I was really interested in talking about that. It grabbed me because that is always the first objection I get when I talk about transparent interview questions, and I'd love to answer that. Let me jump in very quickly and say the question was, how do we ensure competence is not lost if questions are sent to candidates ahead, especially in tech?
Yeah.
And that's a great question. The answer for me is have good quality questions, that it doesn't matter how it doesn't matter whether the person is prepared. You know, if the person can Google the answer to the interview question, it's not a good interview question. You shouldn't be asking it. Your interview questions need to be about competency, need to be about their actual experience, how they approach problem solving, how they relate to the work, how they do the work. And even then, you can't, surprising candidates is not a good strategy for getting the best out of people. That's one aspect. And B, you can never guarantee you'll surprise candidates. They might find your interview questions, your tech test on the internet because someone's uploaded to GitHub. That happens if you work at a big company. Their friend might work in the company and have slid them all the stuff because it's on the company wiki. Or they might just have done 100 of these interviews and you're asking the same questions everyone else asks. And so, yeah, this is old hat, old news for them. And you're going to think, wow, this person knows their stuff. They're really well prepared. No, they just done it 20 times. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really what it does. And as Leah, you both said, it levels the playing field. We want to advantage someone who is not an extrovert. We want to advantage someone who hasn't done 100 of these interviews. We want to get the best out of candidates. We want to see if they can actually do the job. So we craft questions that allow us to see that, and give them a chance to prepare means we're going to get better quality answers. They don't come out of the interview afterwards and go, oh, I had a great example of how I solved this kind of problem, but I went blank in the interview. Like, that's terrible for the company and terrible for the candidate. Letting them prepare in advance means that, like, they got all their good stories, their good examples, the good stuff that you want to hear. And then the second follow-up question I often get is, well, what if they lie? Well, then you fire them during their probation when you see they can't do the job. Let's be real. If they lie so well that they get through interview process, you need to fire them because they're a bad influence. Have probation periods with teeth. That's my answer.
Yeah.
And if I can add, right about especially talking about competencies in tech, I will ask myself, and I ask myself when I prepare this question, is do I want to know if someone can repeat to me how event-driven design is put together, or I want to find out how they are gonna carry on to execute it, right? It's more like questions should not be around oh, tell me the points of this, or tell me this definition. That is Googleable, and to be honest, raise your hand if you've been coding and never have ever Googled the most basic functions, doing your job. That's part of the job. Using Google and resources effectively, what you need to find out when you prepare these questions is what do you want to know about this person? Do you want to know if they can repeat information, or you want someone that is gonna be a team player, a good communicator, a good influence, as Gavin mentioned, is gonna be committed, etc. So that's what you have to do. The interview is not about how much knowledge you have, it's what you do with that knowledge that you can find.
Yeah,
100%. I think the other area that you can look at to try and help combat as well is exactly like V said. For me, so much around tech is teachable, and it depends on what level you're hiring for. Do I need you to be able to start a new project and me watch you do that and waste however much time following piece of document? No, probably not. And in reality, I'm sure you've done that 100 times. So really digging into what it is you're trying to get from that candidate is so important. And I think the other area to look at is personality types. And this is certainly a way that can help reduce the unconscious bias, because you're actually diving into how people think and their personality, and assessing what personality types you have in your team, identifying what gaps you have, and then targeting people that have those qualities. So those are ways that you can really, I think, strip back a lot of the bias and lack of diversity, and and really focus on things that are tangibly missing in your team.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I think a lot of people think a hiring process starts when you actually start interviewing. Yeah, hiring process starts when people I suppose start actually applying to the job, or etc. So I suppose as a tech industry as a whole, what can we do to help, I suppose, LGBTQ individuals feel more confident applying to roles? How can we do that, I suppose, as a wider tech community? I think you might be on mute.
I would say I might go first. For the LGBTQ I plus community, I think the best thing is a sincere approach. There is a lot of unsincere approaches, companies that they are checkboxing, and not only on recruitment, but in their just way of carrying business, right? They are only pride on July, and they are only pride certain days. For me, pride is freaking every day since I'm being a wee little lad, because I knew and I celebrated. It's hard to come to that, but companies need to understand that the community, we do not live 30 days out there. We live, every day, and it's the concept of coming out every single time you have a conversation with a new person. So how that is done by as well diversity and the biases. It's really easy to fall for the biases, both what it can be perceived by someone positive in tech. If I do not say I'm not straight, people, the unconscious bias is because I present really straight. They assume that I'm not, right? That's down to the bias. How you fight those biases? Well, having like people who's doing a challenge, people who is involved, creating the culture of like discussions and openness, giving the space to people to be themselves as well, because you don't need to live out of the closet. That's not an option for everyone, but at least if they cannot, at least they don't need to be fear that if they get out, there's going to be retaliations or repercussions to their job, to their livelihood. So all of that is a bit of based on my experience and what I see, right?
Yeah. How about you, Gav, Leah? Have you?
I think tell stories of how you were adaptable. Showcase the diversity of your company. Show how you embrace different ways of thinking and different approaches. Let people see it, and like we used a great word, sincerity. There's so much insincere, like, oh yeah, we're open to all kinds of people, and then you look at the staff conference and everyone looks and seems the same. They're all young, or they're all a certain race or gender or whatever. It's insincere, and I'd rather companies own their bias and like not pretend that they are going to be transparent, not pretend that they are welcoming. The show a rainbow flag on Pride Month energy is just poor, because last day of that month we turn the pride flag off and we're back to business as usual and hiring as usual. So make visible the actual real work that you do, that is part of the DNA of the organization, to be diverse and to embrace the discomfort of difference.
Yeah. If you want to say something, Leah, go on.
Yeah. I was just going to kind of build on what everyone's already been saying, and I guess just add use all the tools that you already have out there. So use your website, have a section on the diversity in your team, things that you offer, whether it's specific events. So I've heard of sort of specific meetups within companies specifically for LGBTQ community, and Slack channels, and whatever groups that you're trying to make more comfortable. Highlight that on your website, put it on your job spec, so that people, before they're even applying, can see that. And obviously some companies are just going to pay lip service to these things, but I think at least actively choosing to highlight that is giving you a reasonable chance then.
Yeah, I think there's a you mentioned this is a good question from Bimbo here around unconscious bias. Do you want to take that on?
Yeah. Bimbo, thank you for the question. It's a fair question, but I'm gonna challenge that bias, that unconscious bias you're having there, right? You are asking how you're gonna attract good candidates if you give them the questions, right? Assuming that only good candidates can be surprised and answer correctly your questions. So the questions you ask, they can be anything, and the interview is not only about the questions itself. I mean, you need the questions to assess the data, but the conversation is, you're going to sit with someone, you're going to have 45 to an hour conversation minimum. So you as a hiring manager also need to have the skill set to identify their strengths and assess or try to assess the early signs of strengths to enrich your team. Giving that kind of thinking is it's an unconscious bias. And I'm not calling you out, it's very common. I've seen it before, but it's a great example why unconscious bias exists, because we are categorizing off the bat people that we haven't met in good and bad, based on the expectation of if they know what I'm gonna ask, they might cheat, and then you are falling in the unconscious bias, and you're starting your process on the wrong foot, right? So leveling the field is going with the assumption as well that I like to live by the maximum that assume good intention from everyone until I can prove it's not, right? If I have to. So that's how you should move on these things. I mean, good candidates will come, and better candidates probably will come if they know you. If you publicize your hiring process and you made explicit that you're going to answer the questions, that you're going to be adaptable, and you're going to accommodate, the good candidates will show up. And the good candidate, as I said before, is not the guy or the girl or the woman who can repeat information sensibly. That's what you do in school. You memorize, and then you put it out, and then if you do that, you don't learn. You want the people that is going to enrich not only your technical team but the culture of the company by enabling others to be better and getting better themselves. And that you're never going to find a question that you cannot share beforehand that of someone that will not be able to do that.
Yeah. Go on, Gav.
I want to add that interviews are super artificial, and there's a lot of skills that make you great at interviewing and maybe not so great in your job. And we're all biased to someone who can give a great answer off the cuff that really hits all the right notes. Like, it feels good in an interview, but then you go to your job and what you really want is someone who goes, I need time to research that. I need to work with some of my peers. I need to get some information from the team. I'll come back to you by Friday with an answer. That's good. But you can't do that in an interview. But you can get the same energy by giving them the questions and giving them time to prepare. So you undermine your own bias of extroverts. I'll just call them extroverts. People are good on the spot. And you undermine the bias of how real work is done in the real world and how different it is from interviews.
Yeah. I think there's last point on that, what is best? If you're talking about attracting the best candidates, well, you might have 5 people in your team already that tick that best candidate box that you're going to be attracting by surprising people in an interview. So by releasing those questions ahead of time, maybe you're attracting somebody that would never have walked through the door otherwise, and might be better in a different way. Maybe not on paper, they might not be the quickest developer in the entire world. They might not have necessarily the same experience levels, but they might be better in other ways that you're missing.
Yeah, I think we do internally when we're hiring, we actually, different from tech, we actually do a competency interview. We ask people but we actually give the questions to people beforehand. Because you can still determine, for me, whether somebody's going to be a good fit given the question beforehand. And obviously, if somebody then doesn't then prepare, obviously, do they then actually want to work for the business as well? I think that's a good parameter as well. So, no, I really like the idea of actually pre-prepared questions, but I think it's very, very few and far between. I've never really seen it a lot in practice. It's almost, like I said, seen as, we don't want to give it you because if we give it you, you'll win the interview, and it doesn't really work, because an interview should be a discussion, right? In our opinion. So if nobody can pre-prepare a whole hour discussion, it's impossible. Go on, Gav, sorry.
I wanted to say one more thing that's really important about interviews is panels and diverse interview panels. In terms of undermining unconscious bias, I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do, is to have a diverse group of people, diversity of thought, diversity of presentation. Not only is it good for the candidate, but it's good for the hiring manager. And I've got a story about that. I interviewed a candidate and I thought they were great. They had the right energy. They had the right experience and enthusiasm and opportunity. And I got to the interview wash-up and I said to my panel, I love this person. They're an instant hire for me. I'd hire them right now if I could. And my panel was like, no, what? No. And we went through our normal debrief process and they pointed out all the red flags that I'd missed. And it really became aware to me that this person had ticked all the boxes for me that day in terms of my kind of person. I saw myself in them. I was like, this is my kind of person. I want them around me. And because of that, I'd ignored the red flags. I'd overlooked the stuff where they hadn't actually demonstrated competence. And my panel was able to say, no, you're missing the mark here, buddy. And we didn't end up moving forward with that person. And it was because I had a panel who disagreed with me. If it's just me hiring, you're going to get a bunch of people that look like me or that look like what I think good is. And I'm just one person. So undermining your own unconscious bias, you can never do it, but you can have people around you with different biases that can call you out.
Yeah, great point. I think that leads nicely kind of on, and some of the sort of in touch, but without, you don't have to name names, but I don't know, Lee, you've already touched on a couple, but, where have you seen, unconscious bias or heard about unconscious bias recurring, and how has that kind of come about, I suppose? Sorry, I think
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Have you got any examples where you've seen or heard where it actually has occurred, and how has that occurred? Unconscious bias.
Yeah, it occurs. I mean, I think in companies I work, where hiring processes and like later on, like decision-making processes, they were like heavily biased by the collective, like non-diverse group, right? But I can talk about my experience as well, as I think it also resonates with what Gavin was saying of like missing red flags, because my positive unconscious bias, right? Talking with someone that they are openly like queer and they are great technically, and they go to the interview really well prepared, telling me everything I wanted to know in one of my previous companies. I have experienced that, and so I think that it does not feel well, right? Because like, oh, I really like this person. I think as well more systematic unconscious bias. Without naming someone, this is someone that is very close to me. The bias of like around race. This person is Asian. They were born in Southeast Asia, moved to London, and they have lost count of the time that people have asked them if they speak Chinese off the bat during first days. That's a massive. I mean, it's racism, but it's also an unconscious bias, like assuming that because someone it looks some in some way or form, right? They are gonna be speaking Chinese or being, and it's nothing bad about speaking Chinese, right? But they are not Chinese. They are the same way that someone asks me like, "Oh, are you Italian?" No, I'm not. I don't speak Italian. But it's those examples of bias that they are rooting all these systemic problems, right? Because unconscious bias is not an artificial thing that happens on isolation. Happens around like systemic problems like misogyny, racism, ableism, whatever you want to want. And a lot of companies embrace these things without knowing it, because they have these preconceptions and they don't fight them. They do what we're talking about the lip service, the signaling of like we are diverse, but they don't do the work. I've seen a lot of examples. I mean, one of companies I work in London, you will look around and there were like a lot of women, but every time they spoke, no one listened. And the ones who were listening, they're like, why you are not listening to them? They are way smarter. And what I said is what they said before. And it's like, yeah, it's very common. Unfortunately, it's very hard. And a lot of companies, they do not put the effort in train people, because you cannot challenge your own biases. You need people around you to challenge and be open about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also like obviously the topic of the discussion today is around hiring, but it's really important to bring up like how you treat each other on a day-to-day in the company as well. And I know like I've had jobs where being the only woman on a team, the company has just like automatically given me responsibility to organize social events and do all these like things that come nowhere near my job description. And there's no concept of sharing it out. There was no asking the team who would volunteer for it. It was just automatically given to me. And these things are work. Like, they take time. And like, why is that just given to me automatically? Because I'm the only woman. And, and as V pointed out as well, like, are you actually, if you have a lot of women, that's great, but are you listening to them? I certainly had a company, was working in a company that was more heavily female, but the women weren't having as a big impact in the decision making, and that's a problem too. And as you pointed out earlier as well, like a lot of companies will look at their quotas overall rather than at every level, and like the higher up you get, the worse diversity tends to be. So I think like widening that topic to like how are you talking to people on a day-to-day basis, and like that ability to call it out. I think like people get scared to call people out on things and don't want to offend anyone and don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But I think it's really important to encourage an environment where you can call people out and like, not to embarrass them, just to, that's the only way to create change.
Yeah. Perfect. Did you have something there, Gav, or no? Perfect. So I suppose, obviously, conscious of time seems like it's the hour's nearly gone, but I suppose that there's been a couple of like points around this. But as a leader, obviously, three leaders, etc. How do you ensure that it filters down to the wider team and to avoid unconscious bias? Do you want to start, Gav?
Systems and processes, like I think Leah touched on it earlier when we spoke about everyone being responsible for addressing this. Yes, everyone is responsible, but we have power and influence over the systemic issues, the culture of the company, the structures and processes in place that someone, a small IC in some team can't change, like the hiring process, but we can. And the challenge for us is that often these things don't affect us. The things that affect people that are being recruited, people that are new in career, people that are juniors. Like I talk to juniors, but I've forgotten what it was like being new in the industry. I literally have no idea. And even if I could remember, like starting out in 1996 is very different from starting out in 2023. So it's very much about listening and empathizing with others, and the true empathy of believing other people's experience, even when it doesn't match your own. And then thinking about how we can impact and improve the systems that we have so much influence and power over to make it better for everyone and not just us. And then also teaching people how to disagree, teaching people how to call that out, teaching people that it's safe to ask questions and to push back, but also understanding that people who've never done that before, never been empowered to do that before, or just new, are probably not going to be very good at it. They're going to say it in ways that are hurtful and mean and maybe inaccurate. And as a leader, being able to model good listening and being able to embrace that energy and that pushback and yes and make positive change can be really powerful.
Yeah, I think what you said about like creating a safe space is so important, and like that's something that as a leader, like you are really responsible for, is making sure that you're creating a safe space for the whole, for every employee that you have there.
Yeah. Do you obviously for leaders, etc., are quite experienced in interviewing? What about people who aren't experienced in interview? Do we need to give them? How do we give them training on this sort of things? You touched on there, Gavin, which is a great point. How do we get them to have that? Do we need to take them on a wider interview panel to kind of learn, because it is a skill? Being an interviewer is a skill. So how do we do that?
That's a plus of wide panels for me. I like panels of 4. That's the number that I enjoy. It's really labor and time intensive, but it means you get to just bring someone on with like limited experience. You get who's never interviewed before, or whose job role is wildly different from what you're interviewing for. You can bring like a completely non-tech person to a tech interview panel because they'll still have something to share and they'll get to learn and train. So I think diverse panels is a great way of teaching people, but then also just general out of interview training, talking about unconscious bias, talking about hiring strategies, talking about how to get the best from candidates and why we do what we do. We're not just doing this stuff because we're chasing diversity to tick a box. We're like, diversity means we ship better quality products. We're going to make more money by appealing to a wider range of users. This is good stuff. This is why we're doing that. So yeah, definitely teaching people not just the practice, but the philosophy behind it.
Yeah. Anything, V or Leah, that you'd like to add on that? Or
yeah, about leadership and unconscious bias, and the Gav said something that is very impactful. Like a lot of things that not affect leaders. Not only interviewing process, you are not in the weeds of day-to-day work of execution. You are focused usually 3, 6, 9 months ahead. So a lot of things are not there, right? So I think one of the most powerful tools for a leader to fight your unconscious bias is have that the relationship with your peers and your teams to be able to be called out and have the enough self-awareness to listen when do so. It's very easy to be called out and become defensive, So I think that it's important. It's part of the culture and your own core values, as a person. But I think that that's really the most effective tools, like being and always talking, with like being conscious what you are talking about, like making sure that obviously unconscious bias is there, but trying to analyze how you go through life, how you do your job, and what you talk. You can learn. I mean, when people call you out, you need to listen, and you need to also reassure everyone that is not your peer as a leader, that is someone reporting to one of your other reports, that they can walk to you straight ahead and say like, sorry, V, I have some feedback for you about something that you said or you've done. Do you want this feedback now? You want it later? And you should be like there and say like, oh, I would love to hear this feedback. And if it's bad because you failed, acknowledge, apologize, and learn. I think that's one of the most powerful tools. Have that communication, that open communication.
Yeah.
And the safety
Yeah,
place.
and I think just to build on that as well, because like receiving feedback can be actually giving feedback can be really uncomfortable. Receiving feedback can be uncomfortable. Like the whole feedback experience is uncomfortable, and I think you have to, as a leader, be really open to like encouraging feedback to be given, and then also making sure that you take it, like even if it's something that actually hurts you, which it very likely might. Like you need to make sure that whoever gave you that feedback feels like they can do it again, because if you shut them down or if you get defensive or you like make them feel uncomfortable, they're never going to come back to you again.
Yeah. No, great point. I'm obviously conscious of time. It seems like only a minute ago we started and stuff like that. Has anyone kind of got any final points on the topic to kind of round it off at all, or one couple of final points wanted to discuss? Go on, Leah.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like we covered some good ground. I just noticed a question that I then got distracted trying to read.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's from Bimmer again and talking about. So it's quite a long question. So around existing in a he feels like unconscious bias mainly exists in a 2-person or more interview. I think so I don't know if any of you would want to answer that kind of question.
I read the question, and yeah, it sounds like you had a crappy interview, and I'm sorry you had that experience. Yeah, like it's human nature to want to read into the subtleties and how people behaved, and then try and adapt your own behavior to like succeed in the interview next time. Sometimes you just got to take away that was a bad interview, and maybe the interviewers like didn't understand their unconscious bias and didn't know how to interview well and missed out on you and what you had to bring to the company. That sucks. Keep trying. Keep going to interviews. You'll find places that are able to help you shine.
Yeah, and actually, to be fair, Gav, I was thinking, like when you were talking about the 4-person panels, I was actually thinking from a candidate perspective, like that can be intimidating. But actually, again,
yes, and that's Please push back on that. That's a very important pushback.
No, it is, and like it's really valid. But I think again, like that's not on you as the candidate. That's on the company and the panel of people to make you feel comfortable. And like as interviewers, we're not always going to get it right. Like a candidate might walk out, and we collectively might be like, I think we made that feel awkward for them. But like again, it's important to reflect and respond on like your own gut feeling on how it went, because that candidate needs to be able to interview you as well and find out if you're offering what they want. And so it really is a two-way street. And so like experimenting with different formats and ways that you can get 4 people involved in an interview process without making the candidate uncomfortable, like that's on the company to do.
Yeah, I have just on that final point. I have seen it before where companies give people an option where they may say you can have 4 20-minute chats with 4 different people. So one from product, one maybe even from sales in tech, right? I actually feel like we can all join together. Obviously, the labour, time is obviously better spent doing it that way, but giving people an option, maybe it's joined by a panel of 4. So giving actual people an option, could be the way to go there. Some people might feel that's intimidating. Some people might prefer that, etc. And like you said, it all depends on how that interview is actually structured and taking place to make people feel comfortable. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And like I've said, Bimbo, I think you may have just had a bad experience. There's some not so great companies out there that don't take this sort of stuff seriously. So obviously, thanks so much for your time. Obviously, I massively appreciate you joining us. I think I've learned so much today from yourselves. I'm sure a lot of people will have, and I think it's all around sharing experiences. All about, like I said, interviewing is a skill. Skills improve, so just always trying to improve and being able to take that unconsciousness away from actually hiring. It's difficult to do, but I think, like we said, if we can train, learn, and develop off other peers, that's a great way to do it as well, in my opinion. So just want to thank you all for your time, and hope everything's super successful over the next few months for you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Cheers, you too.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.